Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video we'll be having a look at part 3 of my tournament terrain build for Warhammer 40,000. And this is the final part of this little mini-series where I've gone through part 1 showing you how I assembled it all, and in part 2 where I made some of these sets a little bit more customised. But in this video I'm going to go through the basing and also how to get them painted up to a basic level, and I'll also show you how I've taken it a little bit further with some extra additional details. So let's get started then, and the first thing I did is prepared all these different foam parts and some sand. So I've got some big bits here that are going to replicate some of the ruins as they've collapsed. And then I took some of the very bigger pieces and chopped those up into these little bits here. So little bricks, little pieces of rubble. I just took my knife and just cut through it, made loads of different shapes and sizes, and just kept chopping it up until I had a nice box full. Then I got some sand and I dried this out. If it's a sunny day, you can leave it outside, just layer it all out on a flat tray. You can even put it in your oven at about 90 to 100 degrees for a few hours to dry it out too. And I got this sack of sharp sand from a shop called B&M in England. Very similar to builder sand. It's got little pebbles and kind of coarse sand in there. And then this is going to be perfect to give some extra texture to these bases and just get away from this wooden base look that you can see going on here. And then we'll do something extra to this mountain fortress later on. But here's all the terrain that you may have seen in the previous videos. And it was a pretty big job to get all this base, 144 pieces altogether. And the first step is to get some of this PVA. I use the Evo stick, and you can wet this down 5:1 with water, but I just use it straight out, so it's super strong. And then I'm going to put a nice coat of that all over the wood, really push it in to the angles, take it a little bit up the sides of the walls as well, and try not to have dead straight lines. Put a little bit on all the different levels, dot it around here and there on the walls themselves as well, and then when that sand goes on, that's going to add a bit of extra texture. But the first thing to do is to press down maybe 1 or 2 large pieces of the ruin rubble, then get a handful of these little sprinkles, these little bricks, and put those on. Then what I did is I took the PVA glue again and the brush and just added a bit more on there just to work those little bricks and pieces right in, because I want some sand to actually stick to the tops of them as well, and it's just going to add to the effect. And a little bit fiddly, a little bit messy this, and it took a while. It's a bit awkward doing it for the camera, but as I was getting through it, it did speed up a little bit more. As you can imagine, for 144 pieces, this would be pretty slow if I did it like this for everyone. But this bit's quick. You just basically get a big box with all that sand in, and then just cover the whole model with it. Really get stuck in there and don't be shy with it. Get it right into all the corners, so everywhere that you've put any of that glue, make sure you're going to get some of the sand. And then where you've put the thicker parts of glue, like in the corners, some of the larger stones are going to stick to that. But it's important for that sand to stick to every part. And as you can see, it goes up the wall, and that's all going to add to the texture once we've painted it. And that's it. That's the finished part. That's literally all we have to do to texturize these models. And I'm going to leave that overnight to set, and then that'll be ready to paint the very next day. It certainly doesn't take long to dry out as long as your sand is dry. But if your sand's a bit damp, it's obviously going to take a bit longer and could even be a couple of days. Ideally, I wanted to do this outside and leave it in the sun to dry, but it's been such terrible weather in England the past few weeks. I've had to do it all indoors, so it's took over my dining room and my game room as well. But here you can see I've got it all piled up on my game table. It's a lot of terrain. This was a mad process, and I'm glad I won't have to do this many in one go again in the future. But now it's all done, I'm really happy. So once we've gone through this stage and got the texture on all the bases, it's time to get painting. And my go-to for things like this are the garage floor paint. I like to use the Johnstons. It's got a nice selection of dark grey, black or red. I chose dark grey for these buildings. That's going to be perfect for the ruins. Again, I want to do this outside, but had to do it indoors. It does smell, but it's a good process because once it's done, it really strengthens the model and seals it all in. And for this, I just used some cheap brushes. I used a 2-inch brush to get it all coated. Now you could use PVA and you could water this down. You can see the ratio is 5 parts water to 1 part PVA. That would seal it, and you could even mix paint in with it to make your own kind of Mod Podge or use Mod Podge. But for me, I like the garage floor paint. I think it's a little bit cheaper, it goes a bit further, easier to paint, less messy, but it does smell and it does take a good 16 hours to dry. If you can put up with that though, it's definitely worth using, and for that, grey. I've gone for all like the ruins and the buildings, but I've also got hold of a new colour, which is the tile red, and I'm going to be using that on anything that I'm going to use for the desert terrain. So here you can see the tile red, really rich colour, and it's stunning. Once it's dry brushed, I think it looks really cool. But after I've done this series, and I've got the event coming up on Sunday where all this will be played, I'm going to do a video where I do a bit more close-up shots of all this terrain, and I'll show it on the table so you can see it all in action as well, with some pictures from the event on Sunday. So I'm really looking forward to getting that video done. We haven't finished here yet, because now we've got to dry brush all this, and then that'll be the next big stage. I literally dry brushed all this for 7 hours straight, and it was one serious process. But here we go, I've got some Johnston's paint again. This is 1 coat emulsion. It's just a cream, like an off-white, and I've got a 75mm 3-inch brush now, and I'm going to be loading that brush up and using the same technique you use for your miniatures. Just work that into some cardboard, obviously a bigger piece of cardboard, until there's only a little bit left on the brush, and then I use the side of the brush to go along all the edges of the model. So I grab one piece, I do one piece at a time, and just go through it like this. So I get the most of that paint off on all the edges, and then that'll make those the highest highlight. So go all the way around the model doing that. You've got to be careful you haven't got too much paint on the brush, but once you get used to it and you've done a couple of pieces, it happens really fast. So it takes a couple of minutes. And for the time you put in, I think the effect is really great. But having all the battle damage, like the bullet holes and scratches, that's going to really help bring out some texture as well. And then everything we did with that sand is going to help on the base as well. Now you can see here, on the corners, I went a bit rougher. I wanted more paint on the corners. It'll almost act like a vignette. It'll give you like a bright ring around it. And then hopefully that'll draw a bit of attention into the centre and also highlight where the edge of the terrain feature is. And the reason I've used these boards is for Warhammer 40,000 10th edition. It's really important that we know where the terrain ends and starts, and if we're using it as ruins, then the whole base counts as the ruin as well. So it's going to be really obvious when you're working out line of sight, cover, things like that. So go a little bit to town on the edges, really work it in, leave some areas less dry brush than others, so you got some different texture and colour coming through. And that's all I'm going to do on this model, is literally just use this one dry brush, and then that's it done. Later on I can add some other features like posters and things like that. I'll probably print some off and just stain them with some tea and then maybe stick them on. We'll have to wait and see, because I want to use this for some other games as well. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to be doing later on, but this is great as a shell and the basis for what we need to get going. And it's going to look great on the table with 10 or 12 pieces like this. I think it's going to look really fun. So just work it along, make sure you go in there, catch all the edges, and then you're only having to load the brush up once for a terrain piece this size, and then using it where you want most of the paint to come off at the beginning, where you want that highlight to be the brightest. Then you can start going in and being a bit rougher and a bit more aggressive with it, and then that's the finished piece. So let's compare that to one that we haven't done, and you can see here, very easy, very quick, and you've got a really nice piece of grey terrain that's going to be a perfect piece to act as a ruin. So I carried that out for most of the terrain, but I wanted to do something a little bit different, and so I've got a few sets that are more themed, and here's a mountain fortress set. So I highlight it exactly the same way. I went over all the metallic areas just with a dry brush of different metallic paints. I used lead belcher, and then I used a brass paint as well. And then for the rest of it, I've just added some different flocks, some pebbles, some twigs, just using PVA and then sprinkling them on. And that's broken it up really nicely. You can see that metal is a nice contrast against the stone, and then with the green as well. It's a very quick and simple technique, but I think once it's down on the table, you're a couple of feet away from it, I think it works really nicely. I really like this part where it's kind of broken off and you can see it damaged there. But some of them are just going to be rocks, and then I took some of the grass and flock in and just let that work its way up the rocks a little bit, just to break up that grey colour. And I used the process very similar to the process I used with my Age of Sigmar terrain, where I got all different flocks, stones and twigs, some PVA glue, and then just covered the base with it. And if you want to check that video out, I'll link to it at the end of this one. And in that video, you'll see how I made loads of different terrain, including this giant rogue idol terrain set. So that's it. That's how I've got to the final stage of my terrain build for Warhammer 40,000 tournament, and I can't wait to make the final episode this Sunday after the event, so look out for that, probably early next week. But massive thank you to my sponsors and supporters for helping me keep going with these regular videos, and big shout out to Moonstone. I've really been enjoying getting that series going. There's a video on my channel telling you all about the series and what to expect if you'd like to watch that. And a huge thank you to the Little Shop DVD and Games, who are sponsoring the tournaments going forward now. So they'll be providing some awesome prizes for both Warhammer 40,000 and the Age of Sigmar tournaments. So look out for more information on that coming very soon. I'll put a link at the end of this video to the first tournament terrain build as well, so you can have a look at the step-by-step process that I've gone through to get to this stage. But that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video and having a little look behind the scenes of how I get ready for the Warhammer 40,000 tournament, and look out for the other video coming later next week. So thanks so much. If you liked the video, it'd be great if you hit the like button, subscribe for more videos like this one, and I look forward to seeing you here next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters for helping me to keep going with these regular videos. I couldn't do this without you, and I appreciate your support so much. If you'd like to join the Patreon community, support the channel, get some great perks at the same time, there's a link down below in the description. It'll be awesome to see you there.